In 1968, a six-man team was inserted by helicopter into the jungles of Laos. They were Americans, but they carried Soviet AK-47s. Their point man wore the khaki uniform of the North Vietnamese Army. They had no dog tags, no ID, and if captured or killed, the United States government would deny they ever existed in the first place. These men belonged to a unit so secret that the government destroyed all known photographs in 1972. A unit with a casualty rate above 100%, meaning if you joined, you were statistically guaranteed to be wounded or killed. They called it the Studies and Observations Group, a deliberately boring name for the most dangerous special ops unit in American military history. For 8 years, these commandos ran missions into Laos, Cambodia, and North Vietnam, places where American forces were forbidden to go. And they did it all wearing the uniforms of the very enemy that was hunting them down. But here's the question nobody ever answered. Why would America's most elite soldiers dress like the men trying to kill them? To understand McAfee SOG, you've got to understand the failure that created it. Before SOG existed, the CIA ran covert operations into North Vietnam. Between 1953 and 1963, they inserted 28 agent teams behind enemy lines. The results were catastrophic. 456 South Vietnamese commandos were killed or captured. Virtually every team was captured or eliminated. Hanoi had infiltrated the operations so thoroughly the birth of MACV-SOG that they sometimes turned captured agents into double agents, feeding false information back to the Americans for years. So, in January 1964, the Pentagon took over. They created a new unit under Military Assistance Command Vietnam. On paper, it was called the Studies and Observations Group. The name was intentional deception. There would be no studies, no observations, only war. SOG recruited from the best of the best. Army Green Berets, Navy SEALs, Air Force Air Commandos, all volunteers, and every single one signed a 20-year secrecy agreement, acknowledging that if they were captured, the United States would deny their very existence. The chain of command bypassed the entire military structure in Vietnam. SOG reported directly to the Pentagon's Special Assistant for Counterinsurgency and from there to the White House itself. President Johnson personally approved their missions. When a recon team crossed in Laos, the President of the United States knew about it. Now, here's where it starts to get interesting. When SOG teams crossed across the fence in Laos or Cambodia, they didn't look like Americans. They called it operating sterile, and it meant erasing every trace of American identity. No dog tags, no identification of any kind, every serial number filed off of every weapon. Their tiger-striped fatigues were unmarked. Some teams even wore special boots with soles molded to look like barefoot prints. But the most striking element was the point man. In many SOC recon teams, the indigenous point man wore the full uniform of the North Vietnamese Army. Khaki fatigues, pith helmet, sometimes even NVA insignia. So, why would American Special Ops put their own men into enemy uniforms? The answer's simple: 1 second. That's all they needed. When an enemy patrol spotted a SOG team, they had a split-second decision to make. Is that one of ours, or is it the enemy? If the point man was dressed in American gear, there's no hesitation. The NVA opened fire immediately. But if he wore their uniform, carrying their weapon, walking like he belonged there, the enemy paused just for a moment. And in jungle warfare, a moment of hesitation was the difference between life and death. The weapons all told the same story. SOG teams carried AK-47s, the enemy uniform deception Soviet RPD machine guns, and Swedish K submachine guns. Not because these were better weapons, but because they sounded different. An AK-47 has a distinctive sound. When it fired in the jungle, enemy soldiers assumed it was friendly fire. When an American M16 fired, they knew exactly where the Americans were. When SOG teams did carry American weapons, they chose the CAR-15 with a special moderator that made it sound almost like an AK. The goal was always the same: confusion, deception, that valuable extra half-second to react with confrontation. SOG operator John Stryker Meyer typically carried 22 magazines for his car, 15+ grenades, because once a firefight started, it was rarely against a handful of enemies. It was against 100. SOG operated from 3 forward operating bases: Command and Control North and Dang, Command and Control Central and Quantum, and Command and Control South and Beni Thought. Each controlled a section of the border and ran missions into the denied areas beyond. A typical recon team consisted of 2 to 3 Americans and 4 to 9 indigenous soldiers, usually Montana tribesmen from the Central Highlands. These teams were inserted by South Vietnamese H-34 helicopters, known as King Bees, to maintain deniability. The missions lasted 3 to 5 days. The objective was intelligence gathering at the Ho Chi Minh Trail, the massive supply network that funneled weapons, ammo, and soldiers from North Vietnam through Laos and Cambodia into the south. SOG generated 75% of all American intelligence on the trail. That number alone tells you how important they were. But recon was just part of the mission. SOG teams also ran direct action operations, ambushes, sabotage, prisoner snatches, and one of the most devious programs of the entire war. Project Elda's Sun involved sabotaged ammunition. SOG teams would plant doctored bullets and mortar rounds in enemy weapons caches. When MVA soldiers fired these rounds, the weapons exploded in their hands. The psychological impact was devastating. North Vietnamese soldiers began to distrust their own ammunition supplies, sometimes refusing to fire weapons they believed might be booby-trapped. The men of SOG were extraordinary, even by current special ops standards. Robert Howard was nominated for the Medal of Honor 3 times in 13 months. 3 separate actions, any one of which would have earned most soldiers the nation's highest honor. He was wounded 14 times during 54 months in Vietnam and earned 8 Purple Hearts. Then there was Jerry Mad Dog Shriver. The North Vietnamese put a $10,000 bounty on his head. He lived in the barracks with his Montagnard soldiers rather than with Americans. On April 24, 1969, during a mission near the enemy's central office for South Vietnam, he was last seen charging into the Treeline alone against overwhelming enemy fire. He was never seen again. The indigenous soldiers deserve equal recognition. The Montagnats, tribal people from Vietnam's Central Highlands, served alongside Americans with extraordinary loyalty. SOG veterans described them as having a sixth sense for danger. They could smell an enemy ambush before anybody even knew it was there. Vilo made the first combat halo jump in military history while serving with SOC. After NEM, he joined the CIA and spent decades tracking terrorists. He surveilled Osama bin Laden in Sudan in the 1990s. After 9/11, at 71 years old, he deployed to Afghanistan. He died in 2023 at the age of 93, still serving his country. And then there was Operation Tailwind. In September 1970, 16 Americans and about 120 Indigs were inserted 70 kilometers inside a Laos. For 4 days, they fought continuous battles against overwhelming North Vietnamese forces. Every single American was wounded. Medic Gary Rose treated 60 to 70 wounded men while wounded himself, the men who made history, including a hole blown through his foot. The helicopter extracting his team was shot down, and Rose pulled unconscious soldiers from the burning wreckage. 47 years later, in 2017, Rose finally received the Medal of Honor. The delay was because the mission was classified. For decades, the government couldn't acknowledge what these men had done because officially they were never there. The price SOG paid was staggering. Approximately 407 Americans were killed serving with SOG. That represents the majority of all Green Beret deaths in the entire Vietnam War. More than 50 SAW Green Berets are still listed as missing in action. 18 entire recon teams simply disappeared. They crossed in Laos or Cambodia, and they were never heard from again. The enemy specifically hunted them. The North Vietnamese created dedicated counter-recon units whose sole mission was to track and destroy SOG teams. They called these units C-75 battalions. Some NVA soldiers wore medals that said "Kill Americans" as a reward for targeting SOG operators. For decades after the war, SOG remained classified. Veterans couldn't talk about what they'd done. Many were denied VA benefits because their service records were sealed. The government that sent them on impossible missions pretended that they didn't exist. It wasn't until April 4, 2001, 29 years after SOG was disbanded, that the unit finally received the Presidential Unit Citation. For the very first time, the government acknowledged officially what these men had accomplished. Today, SOG's legacy lives on. Colonel Charlie Beckwith, who served the cost and the legacy with SOG's Project Delta, went on to found Delta Force. Dick Meadows, who made 4 missions in the North Vietnam MSOG, became a founding member of America's modern special operations community. SOG's confirmed kill ratio, 158-1. Their operations forced Hanoi to divert 40,000 troops away from the front lines just to protect their supply routes. Small teams of 6 to 12 men tied down entire enemy divisions. So, why did Vietnam's most dangerous commandos wear enemy uniforms? Because operating in denied territory, outnumbered 100-1. Every advantage mattered. A moment of hesitation from the enemy, a weapon that sounded friendly, a point man who looked like he belonged there. These men operated at the absolute edge of what was humanly possible. They signed away their identities, went to places that didn't officially exist, and fought an enemy that vastly outnumbered them. Many of them, they never came home. Those who did couldn't talk about it for over 20 years. But now their story can finally be told, and it deserves to be remembered. If this story resonated with you, we cover forgotten military history every week. Hit subscribe and join us for the next.